They say this house keeps not secrets, but victims. And one day, someone opened its doors again, and his life was cut short. It happened in a small northern town. Locals still avoid talking about that night. At the very end of the street stood an old house, boarded up windows, a crooked fence. Rumor had it that a family once vanished inside, but the police never found the bodies. The house had been empty for years, until a man named Daniel moved in. He was withdrawn, a stranger to the neighbors, and never invited anyone inside. One evening, walking home from work, Kevin, one of the neighbors, noticed the front door to Daniel's house was ajar. A dim yellow light glowed inside, and somewhere deeper in the house came a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Kevin called out, but there was no answer. Peeking through the doorway, he saw dark streaks on the floor, the kind you'd get from dragging a body. The next day, no one saw Daniel. But that night, muffled thuds came from the basement. Through cracks in the old shutters, a faint light flickered. Around midnight, Kevin walked closer and noticed that the ground by the back wall had been freshly dug, as if someone had buried something. A few days later, a young woman from a nearby street went missing. Security cameras showed her walking toward Daniel's house that evening, and she was never seen again. Police arrived with a warrant, but Daniel claimed he knew nothing. The house looked empty, but the basement door was locked with a massive padlock. He said he'd lost the key. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, he crept back to the house and listened. From the basement came muffled sobbing, a woman's voice, followed by a raspy whisper. "Leave, before it's too late." Kevin ran back home, but for the rest of the day, he felt eyes on him, as if someone was watching. A week later, another man went missing, last seen walking past Daniel's gate. Police returned with crowbars. When they broke open the basement, a wave of stale, damp air hit them, mixed with a sickly sweet stench of rot. On the concrete floor lay 3 bodies, carefully wrapped in plastic, their faces frozen in terror. It turned out the house belonged to a family who had vanished years ago. Daniel was a distant relative of the original owner. In old notebooks found in his room, there were strange writings about rituals of cleansing and locking the evil in the cellar. Police never figured out what he meant, but the evidence made it clear. He had been killing people and hiding them in the house. Before his arrest, Daniel remained silent. But one night in his cell, he began slamming his head against the wall and whispering, "They're still here, they're waiting." In the morning, they found him dead, his face twisted, eyes wide open, and a mark on his neck as if a hand had squeezed it. The house was sealed off. But a month later, a young couple bought it. On their very first night, they heard soft footsteps in the hallway. And a knock from the basement. The padlock was back in place, and from the darkness came the same raspy whisper, "Leave, before it's too late." In the mountains, there is a cave from which no one has ever returned the same. Those who ventured too deep vanished, and the few who made it out could never speak of what they had seen. Recently, a group of explorers descended into it, and their story became the last one the cave would ever allow to be heard. In the mountains on the outskirts of the country lay a cave avoided even by the most experienced cavers. Locals called it the Black Throat. It was said to be endless, with places so deep that no light or sound could reach them. Over the last 100 years, dozens had entered, but not all returned. Those who did were never the same. Their eyes were empty, and their speech made no sense. 5 enthusiasts, Jack, Sarah, Tom, Eli, and Mark, believed it was just a legend. They brought ropes, floodlights, and cameras, determined to go deeper than anyone before. At the entrance, an old shepherd stopped them. He only said, "There's no bottom, and no way out." Inside, the cave was wide and damp, water dripping from the walls. Their footsteps echoed at first, but the deeper they went, the more the echo faded, as if the walls were swallowing the sound. After an hour, the path narrowed, forcing them to descend vertical shafts using ropes. Further down, the air grew heavier. Whispers died right at their lips. Their lights barely reached a few meters ahead. Mark joked that his ears were plugged, but no one laughed. Up ahead, the tunnel split in two. They chose the right passage, marking the wall with chalk. An hour later, they tried to return to the split, but the chalk mark was gone. The wall looked smooth and unmarked. The left passage sloped even deeper. Breathing became harder. The air was thick and metallic. Sarah claimed she could hear distant knocking, but no one else could. Tom led the way when the ground beneath him collapsed. The rope tied to his waist went taut and wrapped around his neck. When Jack and Eli pulled him up, his eyes were wide open, lips blue. He wasn't breathing. No one could explain how the rope tightened by itself. After Tom's death, their flashlights began to flicker. One by one, they went out, forcing the group to crawl in near darkness. Then, ahead, a faint red glow appeared. Mark insisted they follow it, thinking it might be an exit or a distress light. The glow came from a cavern with crimson walls. But it wasn't paint. The rocks were wet, and the air reeked of iron. Bones littered the floor, some fresh, with scraps of flesh still clinging to them. Eli whispered that someone was standing behind him. Jack turned, and for a split second saw a tall, thin figure with arms melting into the shadows. They bolted, but the tunnel seemed to shift, narrowing and twisting. Sarah was the first to vanish, simply gone from beside them, her scream swallowed by the dark. Mark shouted he saw light ahead, sprinted toward it, and fell into a bottomless pit. Only Jack and Eli remained. They stumbled into a wide chamber, but it was sealed on all sides. Cracks formed in the walls, seeping thick black mist. Eli stepped back, and melted into the fog without a sound. Jack screamed until his voice became a rasp, and then was gone entirely. The last thing he felt was icy fingers closing around his neck and someone else's breath against his ear. The cave returned to silence, having claimed its newest guests. The Dark Lake. In the heart of an old forest, deep in a valley, there was a lake known as the Silent Lake. The water was black as night, and its surface never rippled, even in strong winds. It was said to be cursed, and anyone who tried to explore it disappeared without a trace. But one day, a group of friends decided to prove it was nothing more than a legend. They were sure they would return with amazing pictures and that the lake held no supernatural dangers. 6 friends, Jake, Laura, Mike, Sam, Kate, and Rebecca, arrived at the lake in late October. The leaves had already started to fall, and the air smelled damp. They set up camp right by the shore, ignoring the strange silence that surrounded them. The lake was lifeless. No birds, no fish, just quiet. Even the wind didn't make a sound. That night, when the fire had almost burned out, Jake suggested a short walk around the lake. He felt something was wrong, but couldn't pinpoint it. Kate agreed to go with him. The rest stayed by the fire. As they circled the lake, Jake noticed that the water didn't reflect the light. The full moon above was bright, but its light seemed to vanish as it touched the surface of the lake. When they reached the opposite shore, Kate stopped. the water began to bubble. At first, the ripples were barely noticeable, but then the splashes grew stronger. Jake wanted to turn back, but suddenly, a dark figure began to rise from the water. It was like a shadow, moving in unnatural ways. Jake grabbed Kate's hand, and they ran back to the others. But everything around them seemed to change. The trees began to twist, and the ground beneath their feet became sticky, like quicksand. When they returned to the camp, everyone was in a panic. Laura couldn't find Rebecca. Sam looked out over the lake and said he saw a figure in the water, a dark, unclear shape, seemingly watching them from the depths. Jake and Kate decided to go back to look for Rebecca, but their search led them to a large stone at the shore, marked with strange symbols, curved lines resembling markings. As they approached, the stone began to vibrate, and a horrifying, inhuman scream echoed through the air. When the group returned to the camp, Laura clung to Mike, her face full of fear. She said she had seen Rebecca drown right in front of her, but her body never resurfaced. The water seemed to swallow her, as if it had consumed her whole. The group decided to leave immediately, but when they tried to head for the road, their cars were gone. A thick wall of fog now surrounded them. The lake began to make strange sounds, as if something was moving beneath its surface, rising toward the top. The night grew unbearably cold, and the air was filled with the heavy scent of decay. The fog grew thicker, and faint voices could be heard within it. Laura, with her face twisted in terror, said that someone named Rebecca kept calling her name. They heard footsteps, and in the darkness, a figure appeared, but it wasn't Rebecca. It was something with a stretched face, deep black eyes, and limbs merging with the shadows. This wasn't a human face. The group tried to run through the forest, but they still couldn't escape this foggy nightmare. Each step felt endless. Laura and Sam tried to move faster but barely noticed how the shadow consumed them. Mike, Kate, and Jake ran ahead, but before them, the lake appeared again, even darker than before. The rocks and trees began to shift, turning into strange, distorted shapes. The lake seemed alive, as if it were trying to swallow them whole. When Jake was the last one left by the lake, he heard a familiar voice. It was Laura. She was calling him from the water, but her voice sounded as if she were underwater, beneath him. He turned around and saw Laura standing at the water's edge, but her eyes were empty, and her body moved like a puppet. She took a step forward, and Jake felt his legs give way, as if he were sinking into a liquid bog. At that moment, everything around him vanished, and only the water, now swallowing him whole, remained in silence. The lake claimed them all, and no one ever learned what had truly happened. The locals never went near the lake again. Those who dared to approach it came back with empty eyes and could never speak of what had happened. The lake remained silent, claiming new victims, and no one knew how many people had become its prisoners. The mysterious, dark lake stood, unchanged, as it always had. The Red Island. A group of friends, Sam, Emily, Mike, Laura, and Jake, decide to visit a remote island hidden from the world for a weekend getaway. The island is famous for its ancient history. Rituals were once held on its shores, and locals consider it a sacred place. But all that remains are old legends and hidden secrets. At first, they don't pay attention to the strange occurrences, but soon, something horrifying begins to unfold. The island looks unusual. Its shore is covered with strange stones, and a light mist hangs in the air. Around them, there is dense forest, but there's a sense that people once lived here. Jake, the leader, convinces everyone to go on a quick exploration of the area. They come across odd artifacts and images on rocks, resembling ancient symbols. Emily notices a strange inscription on one of the stones, but Jake quickly dismisses it, claiming it's nothing more than an imagination. A few hours pass, and the group decides to set up camp near one of the large stones. Night falls quickly, and with it, the surroundings grow eerily quiet. The air turns colder, and strange noises begin to emerge from the forest. Mike hears footsteps but sees nothing in the dark. Laura begins to feel like someone is watching her, but she can't tell who. Emily, growing more anxious, feels that something is terribly wrong on this island. She finds a small metal figure of a person standing by a tree, but no one remembers putting it there. Later that night, when the group is sitting around the fire, Emily decides to walk to the shore to be alone. She feels like she's being followed but doesn't believe it. On the shore, she sees a strange glow emanating from the water. As she approaches, a figure of a woman with white eyes rises from the water, her face distorted, and her body seemingly dissolving into mist. In a panic, Emily runs back to the camp, but her friends can't see her. She begins losing touch with reality, and her voice starts sounding as though she's speaking to someone invisible. The group realizes they are part of a ritual, and now they must escape before they become victims. But the island begins to change. The forests start to close in, and the fog thickens. Suddenly, they lose their bearings, the camp, the fire, it all disappears. Only emptiness and fear remain. Each one of them starts to face their own shadow, which becomes more real. Sam sees his dead mother, while Mike sees his distorted reflection. They begin to understand that the island wants to consume them and keep them forever. The group decides to meet at the ancient altar they found in the center of the island, hoping to destroy the ancient ritual. But as they approach, they realize they can't defeat it. The island is not just alive, it remembers every soul that has stepped on it. The legends are true, and the figures begin to torment them. Jake and Laura fight not only physically but mentally. The ancient spirit's power is not just a nightmare, it's a reality. At the last moment, when they almost lose hope, the island swallows them in fog, and they disappear. The next morning, search teams that return to the island find nothing but ancient artifacts, symbols, and strange footprints. They say that anyone who dares return to this island will eventually be consumed by the ancient forces, just like those before them. The island's secret remains hidden,